you know, before we got on, I was pulling up an old article I wrote. And this is like 9 years ago. And so P90X, Tony Horton, one of my fitness heroes. And I asked him this question of like, what's the difference between this guy who did P90X and he lost 180 pounds compared to the person who can't reach their full potential? And he said to me, it's deep and it's personal. Some folks just never get to rock bottom. They hover above it and it's okay for them. And he said, Armageddon wouldn't get them to make a dietary shift. And I'm wondering, you've got this book, which so many people have read. You've got now over 5 years of talking about it. He hadn't solved that question at that point. I'm wondering, like, when you think of that, the guy who lost 180 pounds and the person who can't make the change, like, what have you learned about those two people?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really common question, or I think a very natural place for your mind to go to wonder those types of things when we're talking about habits or behavior change. In reality, it's very context specific. One of the things I say is like, there is not actually one way to change habits or to build better behaviors. There are many ways. And my job is to kind of lay all the tools out on the table. And the more that you have a full tool belt and the more that you understand the strategies and tools that are available to you, the better position you are to choose the options that might work for your particular context. I mean, let's take the person who loses 180 pounds, since you just gave that example. Well, there are many people who have lost a lot of weight, and some of them are in situations where they're surrounded by friends and family who like to exercise, and that's kind of part of their community, or it was easy for them to get initiated in that sort of thing. And other people were surrounded by friends and family where nobody was interested in that. And you can imagine that those are two very different situations that might require different strategies. Another person, like I have some friends like this. I played college athletics, played baseball in college, and a lot of college athletes, when they finish their career, they can kind of go one of two ways. Like some people, they keep eating the way they were when they were training, and they're not training anymore. And so now all of a sudden, they gain a lot of weight. But then maybe they turn around 10 years later and that person gets in shape. And so this is a person that used to be an athlete. And then now they get in shape again. And then you have another person who maybe they have struggled with weight their whole life. And then they're trying to get in shape for the first time. And so again, those are two very different situations. You can imagine that they might require different strategies. So I think it's natural to wonder what the difference is, but I think in reality, the only question that really matters is, what's the best next choice for me? Like what strategies or tools make the most sense for my situation? And what I tried to do with Atomic Habits and with my weekly newsletter, and now with Atoms, this app that I'm launching, is to give people the tools they need to make the choices that they feel like are best for them. And I'm actually not interested in telling people how to do it, or what habits to build or anything like that. Like Atomic Habits, for example, is very non-prescriptive. It never tells you, hey, you should build this habit. What it does tell you is, listen, this is how most habits and behaviors work. And if you're trying to make better choices for yourself or trying to make progress on a goal that's important to you, here are the strategies that you can use. And this is maybe a clean or a simple way to think about it so that you can make progress. And so that's kind of how I think about it and how I would attack that problem or that question.
I love that. Is there a story that comes to mind, if you shared one that kind of is close to your heart, just in terms of maybe like a case study or feedback you got after the book published from someone that's made a change?
Yeah, I mean, I just heard from a guy today who tattooed an idea from chapter 1 on his arm. I think that's the third Atomic Habits tattoo I've heard about now. Which is absurd, which is wild. Like it's just unbelievable to me where the book has spread and how the ideas have kind of connected with people. My only objective really is to be helpful. I'm just trying to be useful. I mean, there is this huge mountain of knowledge that we all have inherited as humans, from our ancestors, from society at large. Like my little niece, when she was born, she got to inherit all the knowledge that was accumulated during the 30 years between when I went to school and when she went to school, and then I got the benefit of all that for all the years before. And so I'm just trying to add my little bit to the pile, try to contribute something useful, give people something that they can hang on to. And whenever I hear that somebody has enjoyed the book, it feels like a minor miracle, so whether it's somebody who got a tattoo of the idea or, I've heard from many readers who have lost 20 pounds or 50 pounds or 100 pounds. Like it's not just the weight loss ones. Those tend to be the ones that stick out in your mind because they have the before and after picture. And so it's like a really obvious change. But I talked to a person at a book signing who they were like, I read this book and it helped me build a writing habit and write my own book. I'm like that. I think that's awesome. Like, and I don't know how much credit I should really get for stuff like that. Like on the one hand, sure, maybe the book like kind of initiated that or gave them the spark, or it was like the idea that struck them at the right time. But on the other hand, the reader's the person who did all the work, like I mean, I was just there for a very little part of it. So I'm not too worried about, how much credit should I get or whatever. I think I'm just trying to be useful. And, whenever somebody tells me that it's useful, that feels like a win in my book.
That's cool. One thing I noticed in the acknowledgments, you acknowledge so many people, right? Like there were like 50 people. I've never seen somebody thank so many people for their feedback, right? And the other people who have written about habits. I thought that was cool. Like you do a really good job of, just making sure that you show gratitude towards the people that help.
Thank you. That means a lot, actually. I do really try to do a good job of that. I think at some level, pretty much everything that I'm sharing, whether it's in Atomic Habits or in the app or in my newsletter, it has been covered in some way before. Like I'm not really sharing a brand new idea, but I hope that what I can do is be like, hey, here's a different way to think about it, or I've never quite heard it put that way, or maybe here's a new line of attack for dealing with this problem that you've thought about 100 times. And so maybe my job is to kind of like give you a refreshing perspective on these ideas that have actually stood the test of time and have been around for a very long time. And to do that, of course, I've had to learn from a lot of people. So I think it's important to thank all those people. Like pretty much all of my ideas are like the last little 1% on top of the 99% that I've learned from somebody else.
Yeah. And you're in the arena, it sounds like, when you were writing it, like whether it be your weightlifting routine or whatever it might have been.
I try to do that. It's hard to perfectly do this, but
Yeah.
I try to only write about things that I actually use, because I think it makes the ideas better. And, I had to build a writing habit to write Atomic Habits. I had to build business habits to build a successful company. I had to build sales habits to get the book out there. I had to build fitness habits to get in shape. And so like by actually doing that and being, as you said, being in the arena, you also struggle a lot and you fail a lot and you procrastinate on things and you try stuff that doesn't work. And that also, I think, makes the work better. It's by trying that stuff out and kind of fumbling around a little bit that you're like, oh, this is what it looks like to struggle. And maybe if I write about that a little, that'll connect with people too. So I think I've been on both sides of it in that sense. When I was writing Atomic Habits, I sent an email to my publisher and I was kind of complaining about how writing this book is wrecking all my habits. And she said, well, we write the books we need. And that really resonated with me. Like that's why I'm interested in the topic, is because I need the same stuff everybody else needs. Like do I procrastinate? Sure, all the time. Do I focus too much on the goal and not enough on the system? Yeah, of course. And so at some level, all of these concepts are reminders to myself. And when I'm on and, like I'm at my best, I'm putting the ideas into practice. And when I have an off day, I'm struggling with it like everybody else. But hopefully that comes through in the writing.
No, that makes sense. Back to the tattoo. There's so there's a lot of quotes, right? Like Amazon highlights, etc. There is a sentence I jotted down. I feel like it's kind of all over the internet. I'm wondering, is there a saying that people bring up to you quite a bit, or a tagline that really has stood out? I'll share mine.
Yeah, there are probably there are 3 or 4. So there are 3 big ideas, and then there's one practical strategy then those are the things that people talk about the most. One thing as an aside before I share these.
Yeah.
It's always fun for me to scroll through Twitter and see what people are talking about related to the book. And, one thing I like is that every chapter has been touched on at some point, and that feels really good. And I think it speaks to the point I made earlier that there is no one way to change habits. There are many ways. And so when you read the book, a different chapter stands out to different people because that's what they need at the time.
Yeah.
And I've even heard that from the same reader. Some people, there are some Atomic Habits readers now who they start each year off by reading the book. That's kind of what they do in January. And they will tell me, each time I read it, it's a different chapter that stands out to me, or if it's a different idea that resonates with me. And I think it just speaks to the fact like you're at a different place in your life next year. And so, like you need different things at different times. Having said
jump
that,
in real,
oh,
real
sorry,
quick?
go ahead.
There's a saying like, it's not have you read Seven Habits, it's how many times have you read it, right? Like
Hmm.
people would read that book annually, because to your point, it's like you're cleaning out your mental closet or reminding yourself to listen. Or is it like listen first, then seek to be understood, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be, right? So I
Yep.
love that people are reading it continuously.
I'm gonna have to steal that for my sales strategy. It's not whether you've read Atomic Habits, it's how many
How many
times.
times? So I did a Google search before this, and I said, "What are like the top selling books?" And there's a lot of fiction books. Then I said to
Yeah.
myself, "Okay, how many copies of?" And you probably find this out, but like, how many copies of Seven Habits? One number said 20 million, and another said that obviously he passed away, but in total he sold over like 40 million books. But I mean, it just to be in that same breath as like the Seven Habits and on that
Yeah.
bookshelf, I feel like, I know you're a humble guy, but I feel like that it means it's got, sort of a timeless essence to it.
Yeah, thanks. It has been really cool in that sense. I think the last number I heard on Seven Habits, this may not be fully updated, was he sold 25 million copies in the first 30 years. So that's a pretty unbelievable number. Um, I Atomic Habits is I think next month will cross 20 million copies in 5 years. So he had a big head start. But we're making progress. We'll
Yeah.
see. It's been incredible. I feel very fortunate. If it never sells another copy, it's already far outpaced my expectations. Um, but back to your question. So the lines that people stick to or talk about the most. 1% better every day. So that's just a mantra that a lot of people use or talk about. I sell these custom pens with that phrase on it. Like people like that one. Um, so 1% better every day. Um, you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. It's another very, very popular phrase in the book.
That's
And
what
then
that
the
was the
third
one I
one that
wrote
people
down.
really stick. Is that the one you wrote?
That
Yeah.
was the one. Yeah.
And then the third one that people really stick with is every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. And so this idea that your habits are how you embody a particular identity, or they provide evidence of being a certain kind of person. And that one's resonated with a lot of people as well. The fourth one, which is more of a strategy than like an idea, is the 2-minute rule. And this idea of like whatever habit you're trying to perform, you should scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year, scales down to read one page, or do yoga 4 days a week, scales down to take out my yoga mat. And I think that's it's a nice handy shorthand way of saying, can I make this easier? And, what can I do to make it easier to get started today? And so the 2-minute rule seems to resonate with a lot of people as well.
Love that. The third one I was going to ask you about, um, you talk about the deepest layer of behavior change being changing your identity. The goal isn't to run a marathon, it's to become a runner, right? If the two steps are one, to decide who you want to be, and then to prove it with small wins, I'm wondering, what advice do you have for people to do that more effectively and stay the course? Asking for a friend.
Yeah. Do one more effectively. Decide who you want to be, or both steps, like in
How
the
did
small wins thing.
So like for like, okay, I need to lose some weight, right? Yeah, I have a number in mind, but like really the outcome shouldn't be like that. That really shouldn't be it, right? It should be being a healthy
Yeah.
person, or being
Yeah.
being the athlete, right? That I once was. And so if changing your identity is like two steps you should take, like deciding who you want to be and then proving it with small wins, you know,
hmm
how can I do that more effectively? And how can I kind of stay on track or stay the course better?
Well, so rather than like try to answer it for you, I'll offer a series of questions that maybe, like you or the listener can kind of, put those in their own mind and think about what the answers might be. So the first question is, what am I optimizing for? Like in this example, I think the easy thing to say, like you're optimizing for, is, well, I'm optimizing to lose weight. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe you're optimizing for living a healthy lifestyle, or maybe you're optimizing for feeling good, whether that's like how you look in the mirror or just like your energy or how you feel each day. Maybe you're optimizing for feeling alive and excited, or, whatever the answer is, it's probably something personal, and it would be worth it to lean against that question for a day or a week and, try to come up with some different answers. So what am I optimizing for? Second question is like, can my current habits carry me to my desired future? So once you know what you're optimizing for, are you on a path to get there? Sometimes you'll find that you are, that like what you actually need is patience. And the real problem is that you're hoping to get the result right now and you just need to, stick with the course. But a lot of the time you'll find out that your habits that you currently have and this future that you desire for yourself are on two different trajectories. And like clearly something needs to change. I always like to offer this little thought experiment of like, imagine an alien came down from outer space and they were going to follow you around for a day and they can't speak your language. They don't understand anything that you're saying. But if they can't hear your words and they only see your actions, what would they say your priorities are? And you find that like, if you can't, we often justify things with stories to ourselves and come up with all kinds of very eloquent, very intelligent reasons for why this isn't happening. But if you don't get any of those excuses, what would you say your priorities are? So anyway, and then a couple of the other questions to consider. So like another one is, what season am I in right now?
Tell me about that.
Sometimes people have this assumption that what it would look like to be successful with a habit is I'm going to pick this new habit and then I'm going to do it for like the rest of my life. And like, that's what it would mean to be good at this. And you may not even say that explicitly, but you're kind of assuming like that's what consistency would look like. In reality, I think almost no habits work that way. They all have like a season. They have a period that you do them and then something shifts. And there can be many reasons for a change in season in life. Like, your kids get sick, or you take on a new project at work, or you moved in a new city, you get married, or maybe I just talked to a mom who her kids moved out for college now and she's an empty nester. And so it's like, for the last 20 years, I've been this mother every day. And like, now I have all this time. What am I now? And there are many examples of inflection points in life, but when your seasons change, your habits often need to change. And so, these are all big picture questions that are just trying to get at this idea of who am I trying to be? What is this identity that I'm trying to build? So those questions might help you triangulate that a little bit. And then the second part, so we said there are 2 steps to building this new identity. Step 1, decide who you want to be. Step 2, prove it to yourself with small wins. So if we talk about step 2, I think one great question to ask yourself is, what would this look like if it was fun? Most people don't think about that with their habits, but it's a really important hurdle to cross. The most common New Year's resolution is something like, exercising or going to the gym. And I think most people choose this New Year's resolution around exercise because they feel like they should exercise, or like society wants them to exercise, or their peers think they should do it. But we can come up with a very long list of what it would look like to live a healthy life. You could rock climb or kayak or do yoga or whatever, weight train. You don't have to go to the gym. Like you should list out all the options and then choose the version of that habit that feels most naturally exciting to you. And that's true for basically any habit. And that doesn't mean that your habits will always be the most fun thing in your day, that they'll be like going to a concert or something. Like, it's not always going to feel like that, but it does mean that pretty much any habit can be more fun than the default. It can be more exciting than just whatever the first thing is that comes to mind. And I think it's worth it to try to figure out, how can I make this fun? And then the last thing I'll add to that is, what I said was prove it to yourself with small wins. I think I want to emphasize the word small, like you can scale it down. And the feeling of progress is one of the best feelings to the human mind, even if it's less than what you would ultimately hope to do. And so,
do you mean like the paperclip strategy type of a thing? Like just
sure, or like
progress, or jumping on a scale, or
I just talked to somebody the other day who said, well, my habit is I want to write a book. I was like, well, that's not really a habit. It's more, that's like the outcome, and so the habit is writing every day. And my little writing habit is I try to write 1 sentence a day. Now there are many days where I'll write more than that, but make it as easy as possible to feel good about yourself and to feel like I did the thing that cast a vote for being that kind of person. And I'm not saying everybody should have that exact writing habit, but you get the idea. Like you want to scale it down and make it as easy as possible to feel like I'm being the kind of person I want to be. I'm reinforcing that identity. So those are a few thoughts related to that concept.
Love it. I just want to be mindful of time. Do you have a few more minutes or do you have
Yeah, yeah,
time?
for sure. We can go. I got another 20 minutes if you need it.
Okay, cool. I do want to ask you about breaking bad habits because you talk about how that's sort equally important, right? To not go down that
Yeah,
rabbit hole, right? Making it invisible, unattractive, difficult, unsatisfying. Let's use eating something bad at night as an example. And I'm sure you get this a lot. I mean, you talk to a lot of businesses, like corporate events and things like that. People are trying to break bad habits. Maybe they're coping with stress and things like that. What have you found that works? I'll tell you one thing that has kind of worked for me. I don't know if maybe this is part of it, but is swapping it out with, Arnold Schwarzenegger in his newsletter has like, create this, like almost like this scoop of whey protein with milk and a little peanut butter, mix it up. He says he's been using that when he was training for years. So one thought was like swapping it out. Do you have another thought? Maybe use that as an example to break a bad habit.
sure. So, let me give a couple big picture thoughts, and then I'll finish with the granular. What do I do to break it? Um, okay. So first, there are three ways that you can break a bad habit. First way is you can eliminate it. So you just cut it out cold turkey. All right. Second thing that you can do is you can reduce it. So you can still do the habit, but just do it less or reduce it to the desired degree. And then the third thing that you can do is you can substitute. So you can replace it with a good habit or some other desired behavior, which is kind of what you were just mentioning. Um, Different strategies work in different cases. Again, same story as before. There's not one way to build a good habit. There also isn't one way to break a bad one. It's just a question of what feels right for the situation you're dealing with. Um, all right. So let me zoom out a minute and talk about good habits and how they relate to bad habits, and how that
Sure.
might tie in here. So, you know how sometimes if you're growing, you have a plant in a garden or maybe in the forest or something, and one plant can crowd out another, so like one plant gets a little bit more sunlight, a little bit more rain. And so it grows more and then it starts to take up more resources and spreads its leaves and it ends up taking up more space and crowds out the other plants around it. Your habits can kind of have a similar sort of effect. We all, as we have all heard a million times, only have 24 hours in a day. And what that means is that the time you spend on good habits is almost by definition time that you cannot spend on bad ones. So let's say that you have two habits. Let's say your first habit is, hey, after dinner each night, I kind of mindlessly scroll on my phone and I wish I spent less time doing that. And then the second habit is, I'd like to build a good habit of, let's say, exercising for an hour a day. And well, if you take that block of time and you say, well, usually I'm scrolling my phone from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. And you say, well, actually, instead, I'm going to do a workout at 8 p.m. Well, again, by definition, it's hard to scroll your phone when you're in the middle of the workout, right? And so by building the new habit, you're crowding out the old one. So for that reason, I often will actually kind of surprisingly recommend that one of the best ways to break the bad habit is to think about the good habit first, to think about, is there something else you could be doing with that time? And we could say that this falls into the substitution bucket or that replacement bucket. All right. So now let me get back to your question about
Yeah.
breaking the bad one.
And Arnold would just say, sleep faster.
So for building a good habit, there are like four things that you want. So from a real big picture level, you want to make it obvious, you want to make it attractive, you want to make it easy, you want to make it satisfying. And as if you're sitting there thinking, how do I build this good habit? You can just go through those four steps and ask yourself, how can I make the behavior more obvious? How can I make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? How can I make it more satisfying? And the answers to those questions are going to sort of reveal or call forth some answers that you can use to get the habit installed. Now, for breaking a bad habit, as you mentioned a minute ago, you want to do the opposite of those things. So rather than making the habit obvious, you want to make it invisible. Unsubscribe from emails, don't keep junk food in the house, reduce exposure to the queue. Rather than making it attractive, you want to make it unattractive. Rather than making it easy, you want to make it difficult. So increase friction, add steps between you and the behavior. And rather than making it satisfying, you want to make it unsatisfying. So layer on some kind of cost or consequence. All right. So why did I spend the time breaking down those two? Well, for building a good habit, those four steps, obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying, I think you can focus on any of them. If I had to pick, you forced me to say, hey, which one should I start with? I would say start with easy, make the habit easier, scale it down. But really, in reality, all four of those things, the more that you can do those, the more it's going to help promote the good habit. Bad habits are a little trickier. So remember the inversion of those were make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, make it unsatisfying. All right. So let's take late night snacking, eating a donut or eating chips or whatever. All right. Make it invisible. That's actually a pretty good one. So you could,
Yeah.
put the chips or the donuts or the treats or whatever. I talked to somebody who they locked them away in a closet outside of the kitchen. So it's not where the rest of the food is. Or you could put it on the highest shelf in the pantry or the lowest shelf in the pantry. So you're less likely to see it. Have it behind cabinet doors, not out on the counter. All of these are steps for making it less visible. All right. Um, Make it unattractive. That's actually a pretty difficult one. Like you already know that a chip is tasty, so you can't just magically convince your mind, oh, this is unattractive now. There is a way to do it. I don't want to get into like a long-winded tangent, but the way to do it is kind of difficult. You could potentially have like this moment where you realize, oh, I don't like this anymore. That's pretty rare. Um, it's probably by changing your identity, and we could talk more about that if you want, but basically it's a longer process. So it's not like an immediately actionable piece.
There was,
Make it difficult.
I don't know if you heard this, but like a long time ago, I had these like Tony Robbins CDs and I would, play them in my car. And he had this thing he would call quality quantifiers. And he would have you like imagine a plate of cookies on the table. And then, okay, what is it? Like an 8 or a 9? Like, how bad do you want it? He's like, what would make it a 6? What if it had mold on it? Like, you're just driving, like listening to this. What would make it a 3? So just something I thought about, like how to make it unattractive. It's like this
Yeah.
old tape.
Yeah. That's interesting. There's a book called Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking. And it's all about quitting smoking. And the whole book basically is him just going through like the excuses that people have for why they smoke. So like, well, I smoke because it's nice to socialize with people. And he says, that's a lie. You've socialized with people without smoking before. Or like, I smoke so that I can relax and it calms my nerves. And he says, that's a lie. Smoking doesn't calm your nerves. It stresses your nervous system out and like fries your nerves over time. And it's just him going through one after the other of all these like reasons and why they're all false. And it's just basically trying to do this, whatever this Tony Robbins thing is too, where you like rewire your mind about how you're thinking about it. And there are there are many readers who swear by it and say that that book changed them and helped them quit smoking. Of course, there are also plenty of people who read it that it didn't work for. But I think
Yeah.
if you are in the right mindset, yeah, there's something about that can work. But anyway, all right. So the third one, rather than making it easy, you want your good habits to be as easy as possible. You want to make your bad habits difficult. So if the chips are 2 miles down the road at the grocery store, that's a lot harder to eat them than if they're in your pantry 2 feet away. And so a lot of
That
that's
was
about
that was a rule of
friction.
mine. Ice cream I
Yeah,
cannot have in the house. If I want it Friday night or whatever, I have to go get it. And there's
you
like a
gotta go
walk
drive.
there's a walk of shame too. Just,
Yeah,
going out.
yeah. And it's interesting how often so I think this is a really good one. The punchline I'm ultimately getting to here is the first and the third law, make it invisible and make it difficult. Those are the best two to focus on for breaking a bad habit. And so to build on your point about you had to drive there, you have to walk there to get the ice cream. It's surprising to me how often this works for bad habits. So like, let's take a couple examples from my life. So beer, if I buy a 6-pack of beer and I put it in the front of the fridge, well, it's in the door, it's right there in front of me when I open it, I'll have one at dinner just because it's there. But if it's like on the lowest shelf in the fridge, like all the way in the back, I got to kind of like bend down to see it. Sometimes I'll forget that I even have it. It'll sit there for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. Like I won't even know. And so I'm like, well, did I want it or not? Like in the one sense, yeah, because I grabbed it all the time. But in the other sense, I never wanted it bad enough to bend down and look for it. Like it was only when it was right in front of me. Or my phone. I can't do this every day, but probably about 70% of the time, I'll leave my phone in another room until lunch each day. And whenever I do that, I almost always have a better morning. And I have a home office. So if I want it, I could just walk down the hall and go get it, but I never do. And yet, when it's right next to me, I'm like everybody else, right? I check it like every 3 minutes just because it's there. And so it's the same story. It's like just a little bit of friction reduces the behavior to the desired degree. And so I would think about those two. If you're trying to break a bad habit, how can I make it less obvious? So how can I keep it out of sight? And how can I increase distance or increase friction between me and the behavior? Last example I'll give, which I just thought was an interesting one I came across when I was researching the book, is a lot of people have trouble biting their nails, and that's their bad habit that they want to break. Well, one of the challenges is your hands are with you all the time, right? So you can't increase distance. You can't make them invisible. Like they're right there. And one interesting example I came across from someone who successfully stopped biting their nails was they got Invisalign, the liners, the retainers to put on their teeth. And so while they were straightening their teeth, they had to wear the liners all the time. And that made it difficult. You can't actually bite your nails when you have those on. And I thought, well, what if you just like took them off? But actually, when I got Invisalign a little bit ago, they have kind of like bumps on them on they're like these ridges, they call them holes on your teeth, and they kind of grind on your gums. It's actually kind of uncomfortable to not be
Oh,
wearing the liners. And so you don't want to have them off. And that's enough to get people to quit biting their nails. So that same basic idea of how can I make it difficult? And that applies to something that's even on you all the time, like your hands. And so sometimes it requires some creative thinking for how to apply these concepts. But from a big picture level, that's what you're trying to do when you're trying to break a bad habit.
I love it. I mean, also like just the awareness that, asking yourself questions. I really liked Ali Abdal's book. One of the reasons was the prompts, right? Like the
Mm.
questions you share with me. I feel like the more questions I can ask myself about something, the more awareness I can have. It's a blind spot for me is the awareness piece. I wanted to
I
ask,
actually think
yeah,
questions are more important than advice. Advice is pretty brittle and like context dependent.
yeah,
Maybe if you're talking to somebody who's got the same, situation as you or very similar, and they've done it really recently, then the advice is like can be decent. But for the most part, advice is like so context dependent, but
yeah.
questions are real flexible. Like they'll call forth different answers from different people, and it's usually the answer that is relevant to you. So anyway.
It's deep. I feel like you can reflect. I wanted to ask you before we get in the app, I want to ask you about complacency because I feel like success, the saying like success breeds complacency. And
Hmm.
one of the things you said, it's in the section where you talk about how to stay focused when you get bored working on your goals. You said the greatest threat to success is not failure, but boredom. It's easy to rationalize taking a day off because you're in a good place. When you sell 20 million books, how do you avoid the complacency trap? Because it gets to be, I feel like, more difficult to not be complacent the more success you get.
Yeah. Um, well, I think one answer is it can be about that. Like if it was about selling millions of books, if that was the reason you did it in the first place, then maybe you don't need to do it anymore because now you've done that. But if the reason was something else, if the reason was I want to be useful or I want to contribute something valuable to people or I want to help people solve problems they're dealing with, well, all of those reasons are still relevant. And so that gives you a great reason to show up and work on it. And so I think if it's kind of this uh, it's like, are you doing it just for the reward? Or are you doing it for, well, I guess which reward are you doing it for?
Mm.
Are you doing it for the millions of copies? Or are you doing it because you want to help? So, my answer, of course, is, well, I love doing it for both. It's fun to sell a bunch of copies, but it's also really fun to provide something useful. So, um, and then I think that kind of leads into the first thing that came into my mind, which is it's still fun. Like that's the reason I'm
Yeah.
still doing it. It's like it's still enjoyable. And so I
The
think when it's
feedback
not
never
fun,
gets old, it sounds like, right? When you hear those stories, whatever it might be, so I changed my life for XYZ. I imagine that doesn't get old. And to your point, it sounds like your compass is in the right direction, doing it for the right
I hope
reasons.
so. I still have a lot to learn, like I mean, I've only written one book. I think there's still a lot to discover. And I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm sure I'll make a lot more, but I think it's still enjoyable. I still find value in it and people are finding value in it. And that gives me plenty of reason to show up each day. And when I don't feel that way, or when I feel like the ideas are stale or they aren't helpful anymore, then, I'll try to find a new outlet for that.
Yeah. So was the app, was it to the purpose of it, was it to like help people get it off the page and like put it in a practice or like why would you how do you describe what the purpose of the app?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a little bit of that. So a book, once you write it, you can't go back and rewrite it. Like it's done, and that partially terrified me when I was working on Atomic Habits because like, man, better get it right because you're not going to get to go. It's not like a blog post. I can't just go back
Yeah.
and log into WordPress and update it. So The app is not like that. The app can grow and evolve. You can add new content. I have a lot of ideas that I've come across over the last 5 years since the book has come out. They're not enough to like write another book, but they're certainly useful and there's plenty of content there. So the app gives me an outlet for that. There also is like people read the book, but they may not. The book isn't like it's not like they're with them every day the way that your phone is.
Yeah.
And so the app can always be there almost like a guide. And in some ways, it can arrive or show up exactly when you need it. Like we just know certain things. It can be customized and individualized in a way that a book can't. Like the book is never going to know, hey, you were performing this habit 4 days in a row and then you've skipped 2 days. But the app will know that. And so it can show up and say, hey, what can we do to help get you back on track? Here's an idea that might help you, get this established and so on. So the customization is one reason. The ability to continually update it is another. And then the third reason that I'll offer is one thing that has surprised me about writing a weekly newsletter. So I write this newsletter called 321. It's just 3 short ideas from me, 2 quotes from other people, and then 1 question to think about for the week. And over 3 million people subscribe to it now. And I'm always like a little bit surprised by how popular it is, because a lot of the ideas that I cover, even though I'm writing something new each week, it's the same kind of basic idea as what I'm covering in Atomic Habits. And so I'm like, well, why wouldn't you just read the book? Why do you, show up and open these emails every week? And eventually what I heard from readers, and it was kind of a surprising insight for me, is, the reason that we keep reading these things, that we want to sign up every week or get a newsletter on it or whatever, it's a very human reason, which is we need to be reminded. Like everybody has this experience where you have something that you say is important to you and then you get distracted, or you work on something for 2 or 3 days and then your kids need something, or you get interrupted, or you fall off course. And so we're constantly battling. It's like literally a daily battle to stay focused on the things that matter and to try to keep your mindset in the right place, to not let negative self-talk get the best of you, to just kind of like continually pull yourself back to center. And so the newsletter does that a little bit. I think the app will be able to do it even better. So one of the key features of the app is that you'll get daily lessons from me. And so through the daily lessons, my hope, these are all short. They're like 2, maybe 3 minutes. And my hope is that it ends up becoming the kind of thing where like, man, these daily lessons are so good that I want to just open the app each day and like kind of start my day with those 2 minutes and feel like, oh, now my day's off to a really good start. And then I also use the app to track my habits and so on, it lets you do other things, but that it's almost like a mindset,
the daily dad of habit building or whatever, I have the daily dad over here. Right. But it's the reason I was able to read it. It didn't feel like this 8-hour commitment. It was like, okay, I'm going to read 1 page. I feel guilty for yelling at my kids last night or whatever. Like, what is something that I know it's only going to take 2 minutes? I literally have no excuse to not read a page or 2. And it's always here, right? And it's easy to commit to because it's so short.
Yep. That's great. So anyway, it's that sort of idea. So I think those are some of the key things the app does that the book doesn't do.
Yeah.
And my hope is that they'll make a perfect tandem. That like the book is like kind of the ultimate reference guide. Hey, here are all the strategies. This is like, all the science on it. Here's how the whole thing works. And then you're like, okay, you finish the book. You're ready to implement this now. Like, do you want these to be like part of your ongoing lifestyle? Great. The app is like designed to kind of help make that happen.
I love it. Is there anything else about the app you feel like would be good to just kind of double click on? Or, one thing I thought about, like, what are the components that makes an app sticky? Versus other apps that people have in the same category, like a Headspace or, I know it's not a meditation app, but like, oftentimes we'll download them and then, the usage is low.
Sure. I think there's probably like 3 things to mention. So the first is, my expertise is on habits. So Atomic Habits, highest rated habits book of all time, fastest selling habits book of all time. My expertise is not in apps. So I went out and I found the best partner I could for it. And MetaLab has designed like literally the world's best apps. So Slack, Uber, like they've worked on huge apps. And so I think that marriage of the two, like world's top app company and world's top habits author, like that's kind of interesting and hopefully will lead to good outcomes. part of that process, and something that I kept encouraging MetaLab to do as we were designing this, is the app. Really, there's kind of like two questions that are at the center of the app. The first question is, can we help people take action? People have habits that they want to build. What can we do to help them take action? And then the second question is, how can we make this more delightful? And I think if we can do those two things, if the app helps people take action and if it's delightful to use, we're probably not going to have a problem getting people to stick. So that's at the kind of the core of the design process. And then I think the third thing that makes the app unique or different, that's worth kind of, expanding on is, let me answer this by way of proxy. So, my Instagram account is actually very weird. If you go to Instagram and look, you're like, okay, this guy's got over 1 million followers, but there are no pictures. You don't see my face. There's nothing that's normally Instagrammable on the account. It's just blocks of text on a white background. And I consider that to be a very useful handicap. And I do it because there is nothing to hide behind. The ideas have to be good enough. Otherwise, people won't follow. And my hope is that I can hit that same standard with the daily lessons in the app. And it's not just daily lessons. There's also a lot of other content there. But the content library should be so good that people will come back just for that. And I think that there are many apps and there are many programmers who can design an app that tracks your habits, but there's only one Atomic Habits and there's only one of me. And so it really is putting a lot of pressure on me to perform at a high level. But if I can do that, if the ideas are good enough and they were good enough in the book and they're good enough to get 3 million newsletter subscribers, if they can be good enough in the app, then I think people will want to show up and use it because they will read the ideas and think, this actually helps me get better. This actually makes my life better. And so in a weird way, we've kind of come full circle in this conversation. I feel like one of the first things I told you was, I'm just trying to be useful. And I think that's in some way kind of the key sauce for this app is if the ideas are useful, that'll be enough to get people to open it up again tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it sounds like obviously you've been doing this for the right reasons, which is why it's so popular. And, you've helped so many people. And this is just another way to extend the book, the newsletter, which is awesome. So, and I appreciate the therapy sessions. The check is in the mail. Because
right.
I think
don't invoice me until you actually get the outcome you want.
Yeah, I think it was Dan Pink said, "All research is me search," and so I subscribe to that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, man. This is great. I'm glad to talk to you. Appreciate the opportunity, and hope you enjoy the app.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it. Great meeting you.